Hey guys, welcome back to my channel where we dive into the most fascinating and exciting Nollywood movie stories. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss out on any of our latest stories. Trust me, you'll want to stay tuned for more. Today we have an incredible story that's going to keep you hooked from start to finish. It's packed with drama, suspense, and everything that makes Nollywood so thrilling. So grab a seat, relax, and let's jump right into this captivating story that I know you're going to love. One morning, Samson, the spoiled and arrogant son of Mrs. Badmus, a well-known politician with a fearsome reputation, was still in bed, snoring away. Mrs. Badmus, known for her strictness and strong influence, entered his room and approached his bed. She tapped him lightly to wake him up, a slight annoyance in her voice. "Samson, are you not going to school today? It's getting late, and here you are, still snoring like a log." With a groggy grumble, Samson replied, "Mom, I'm not going to that stupid school again." Mrs. Badmus, taken aback by his tone, raised an eyebrow and sat down beside him, surprised. "Why? What happened?" Samson sat up, annoyance flashing across his face. "Mom, you wouldn't believe what they did to me. Just because I poured water on a classmate and tore his book, the teacher had the nerve to flog me and make me stand in front of the whole class. It was humiliating." The story ignited a fire of indignation in Mrs. Badmus. She had always believed that her status meant her son deserved respect, even if he didn't show it to others. "What? How dare they treat my son like that?" She immediately ordered Samson to get ready for school. As soon as he was dressed, she stormed out with him in tow, determined to set things straight. When they reached the school, Mrs. Badmus marched straight to the principal's office, her anger obvious. She demanded to see the teacher who had punished her son. As soon as the teacher entered the room, Mrs. Badmus launched into a tirade, throwing insults and accusing the school of disrespecting her family. "How dare you lay a hand on my son?" she spat. "Do you have any idea who I am?" The principal tried to calm her down, pleading, "Madam, please, let's handle this professionally. I assure you, it was just a disciplinary measure." But Mrs. Badmus wasn't interested in any explanations. "If you don't fire that teacher, I'll make sure this school gets shut down. I'll use every ounce of my political influence to see it happen." She turned to the teacher, who was now visibly nervous, and added, "And you, if you ever touch my son again, you'll regret it." The teacher, trying to salvage his job, went down on his knees and begged, "Madam, please, it won't happen again. I apologize." Mrs. Badmus gave him a final warning glare before turning to leave with her son, her message loud and clear. The following day, across town, Mr. Solomon, a local pastor known for his integrity, was in his living room, a look of disappointment and frustration on his face. His son, Bright, stood in front of him, his eyes lowered as his father continued to lecture him. "Bright, look at what you've done. I warned you not to get involved in any trouble, Taff, but now look. You've gone and gotten yourself expelled." Bright looked up at his father, trying to defend himself. "Dad, I didn't go looking for a fight. Those bullies are making life miserable for everyone in school. I couldn't just stand by while they tormented everyone. The teachers weren't doing anything, so I had to do something." Mr. Solomon sighed, shaking his head. "Bright, I understand that you wanted to help, but you didn't think about the consequences. Now, because of this, you've been expelled, and no other school is likely to accept you." Bright felt the weight of his father's words, frustration and disappointment mingling in his heart. "Dad, didn't you always say that we should help others when they're in need?" "Yes, I did," Mr. Solomon replied, his tone softening slightly. "But I didn't mean for you to put yourself in a situation like this. You could have come to me or found a better way." As they were talking, Mrs. Solomon entered the room. She had been listening quietly and finally decided to step in. "Enough of the blaming. We need to think of a solution," she said firmly. Mr. Solomon sighed again, his expression one of resignation. "I suppose the only option left is to send you to the family school." Immediately, Bright's face fell. "No, Dad, please, you know I don't want to go to that school." Mr. Solomon looked at him with understanding, but also with finality. "I know it's not your first choice, but with the record you now have, no other school will accept you. We have no other options." Bright was silent for a moment, the realization of his limited choices sinking in. Reluctantly, he agreed. Fine, Dad, I'll go to the family school. Mr. Solomon put a hand on his son's shoulder, offering a reassuring smile. Bright, just remember, keep to yourself and focus on your studies. Avoid any trouble and mind your own business. Bright nodded, even as his mind lingered on the injustice that had brought him here. He knew he would have to tread carefully, but deep down he was unsure if he could truly ignore the wrongs he saw around him. The next day at school, Jenny, the most brilliant and beautiful girl in class, sat with her friends, chatting and laughing. Her intelligence and charm made her popular among both her classmates and teachers. As they talked, Samson and his gang swaggered into the room, their presence silencing the group. With a casual wave of his hand, Samson signaled for everyone to leave, a demand they reluctantly obeyed. But as Jenny stood to go, Samson quickly stopped her. Jenny looked at him, surprised, as Samson gave her a sly grin. "Jenny, I want you to be my friend," he said, his voice carrying a hint of arrogance. Taken aback, Jenny replied firmly, "No, Samson, I don't want to be your friend." She attempted to walk away, but Samson suddenly grabbed her by the neck, pulling her back. She froze in shock and fear. "No one refuses to be my friend," he snarled, his grip tightening slightly. "And I better not see you with any other guy, Jenny. From now on, we're friends." With that, he shoved her away, causing her to stumble back, trembling with fear. As he and his friends walked off, Jenny was left standing there, her heart racing. Later that day, during the lunch break, Samson and his gang prowled around the school grounds, searching for someone to bother. They soon spotted a junior student about to eat his lunch. Approaching him with deceptive smiles, they convinced the younger student to hand over his food, leaving him hungry and dejected. The next morning, Bright, Mr. Solomon's son, arrived at Wisdom King International High School, his new school. As he walked through the halls, many of the girls couldn't help but stare and blush, captivated by his handsome face and confident presence. Soon after he entered his classroom, the teacher arrived and introduced him to the class as the new student. One girl, Ella, was especially smitten. She couldn't take her eyes off him, and once the teacher left, she quickly stood up to introduce herself. "Hi, I'm Ella," she said shyly, smiling at him. Bright smiled back warmly. "Nice to meet you, Ella." The two exchanged pleasantries and chatted for a while, discovering they shared a few common interests. Ella felt instantly comfortable around him and found herself hoping they could become friends. That same day, as school was letting out, Bright was gathering his things to go home when he found his path blocked by Samson and his friends. They stood there, arms crossed, looking at him with mocking grins. "So you're the new student, huh?" Samson asked, looking Bright up and down. "Yes, I am," Bright replied calmly, unfazed by their attempt to intimidate him. Samson raised an eyebrow. "Do you know the rules around here?" he asked, a smirk on his face. Bright, genuinely confused, replied, "What rules?" "Oh, they haven't told you," Samson said, patting Bright on the back with a mock-friendly gesture. "Don't worry, you'll find out soon enough." With a final smirk, Samson and his friends sauntered off, leaving Bright wondering what they were talking about. Later that night, Bright and his family sat down for dinner. Mr. Solomon, curious about his son's first day, asked, "So, Bright, how was your first day at school?" Bright replied, "It was great, Dad. Everyone there is nice and welcoming, but there's this group of boys who came up to me and asked if I knew the rules of the school. It was odd." As Bright spoke, his father's expression grew serious. "I hope you're not planning on getting into any fights this time, Bright." Bright felt a flash of frustration. "Dad, why do you always make it sound like I got into fights for no reason? They came after me before. I was only defending myself." Before their conversation could escalate into an argument, Mrs. Solomon interjected, giving them both a stern look. "Enough, let's eat in peace," she said firmly. The rest of the meal passed in silence, and afterward Bright went to his room, still thinking about the strange encounter he'd had with Samson. The following day, during a quiet moment at school, Bright was sitting by himself, focused on reading his book, when he was interrupted by the arrival of Samson and his gang. Samson strolled up to him with his usual arrogance. "Hey, Bright," Samson said. "I want you to join us." Bright looked up, confused. "Join you? For what exactly?" Samson's friends chuckled, exchanging glances before bursting into laughter. Samson leaned closer, his tone forceful. "I want you to be part of our group. We could be friends." Bright stood up, meeting Samson's gaze without fear. "Sorry, but I don't want to be your friend." Samson's face twisted with anger. He stepped closer, towering over Bright. "No one ever refuses my friendship," he said in a low, menacing tone. Bright, undeterred, replied firmly, "Well, I just did." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Samson seething with rage. Later that day, Jenny sat alone in class, her face clouded with worry and sadness. Bright noticed her troubled expression and decided to approach her. "Hi, Jenny," he said gently, catching her by surprise. They exchanged pleasantries, and Bright mentioned, "I've noticed that you're always on your own, or you're busy reading. Is everything okay?" Jenny managed a small smile and replied, "Well, reading is just something I love doing." Bright smiled back, sensing her hesitation but respecting her space. They began chatting, finding common ground as they talked about school, books, and their goals. Slowly, Jenny began to open up, feeling a rare comfort in Bright's presence. Meanwhile, Ella, who had been watching them from across the room, grew increasingly jealous. Unable to bear the sight, she ran outside feeling hurt. The next morning, Samson was on his way to school when he spotted a junior student walking in his direction. The boy tried to avoid making eye contact, but Samson called out, forcing him to stop. "Hey you, didn't you see me?" Samson snapped as he moved toward the junior, who froze in fear. Before the boy could respond, Samson slapped him hard across the cheek. Shocked and helpless, the junior apologized softly, his voice trembling. "Good," Samson sneered, satisfied with his dominance. He then tossed his bag at the boy. "Carry this for me." The junior nodded, obediently shouldering Samson's bag, too intimidated to refuse. As they reached the classroom, Samson swaggered to his seat, leaving the junior shaken. Soon after, the teacher entered and began the lesson. She continued teaching until the bell rang, then left, while Samson's attention remained elsewhere, already plotting his next move. That afternoon, as students were leaving school, Samson and his friends waited just outside, lurking in the shadows near the entrance. They had their sights set on a classmate named Jeffrey. When Jeffrey finally emerged, he stopped, visibly frightened to see them blocking his path. "Relax, Jeffrey, we're not here to hurt you," Samson said with a mocking smile. Reluctantly, Jeffrey stepped closer, unsure of what they wanted. Samson and his friends took out their unfinished assignments and handed them over to Jeffrey. "You're going to finish these for us, got it? Or else consider your lunch gone every day for the rest of the term," Samson threatened. Jeffrey, intimidated and cornered, nodded quickly, accepting the pile of work. Nearby, Bright witnessed the entire scene from a distance. He clenched his fists, wanting to intervene, but remembered his father's words about staying out of trouble. Torn between standing up for Jeffrey and following his father's advice, Bright reluctantly decided to walk away. That evening, Samson sat with his mother, Mrs. Badmus, in their lavish living room, watching TV. She looked over at him and asked, "So, Samson, how's school been lately?" A proud smirk appeared on Samson's face. "School is great, Mom. You should see how I've put those students in their place. They all know who's boss." Mrs. Badmus chuckled approvingly. "That's my boy. You know you're my only child, and I would never let anyone hurt you. I want you to be happy in whatever you do. If anyone bothers you, you come to me, and I'll handle it." "Thanks, Mom," Samson replied confidently. After a reassuring pat on his shoulder, Mrs. Badmus headed upstairs, pleased that her son was, in her eyes, taking control. The next day at school, Bright and Jenny were chatting and laughing together in the hallway. They enjoyed each other's company, and Bright's kindness had helped Jenny open up, shedding some of her usual caution. But as they talked, Ella spotted them and felt a pang of jealousy. She couldn't hold back her frustration any longer and hurried to find Samson. When she finally located him, she blurted out, "Samson, Jenny's with that new guy Bright, and they're getting close." Hearing this, Samson's face hardened with anger. He stormed down the hallway toward Jenny and Bright. The moment Jenny saw Samson approaching, her smile vanished, and she quickly tried to pull away, but Bright gently held her arm, keeping her close. Samson stopped, his cold eyes locked on Bright, a silent threat simmering beneath his gaze. With a subtle but unmistakable hand gesture, Samson signaled to Bright that he was watching him closely. Then, without a word, Samson turned and left, leaving Jenny visibly shaken. Bright, puzzled and concerned, turned to Jenny. "What's going on, Jenny? Who is that guy?" She hesitated, fear evident in her eyes, and replied, "It's nothing. Don't worry about it." Bright's expression darkened with frustration. "Are you serious, Jenny? I can tell something's wrong, but if you won't tell me, then fine." Angry and hurt, he walked away, leaving Jenny feeling even more isolated. The following day in class, the teacher entered and immediately noticed that Samson and his friends were absent. "Where are Samson and his friends?" she asked, looking around the classroom. The students fell silent, too afraid to speak up. Just then, Samson and his friends sauntered into the room, ignoring the teacher's presence as they took their seats. The teacher, clearly upset, tried to question them about their tardiness, but Samson ignored her completely, slouching back with a defiant smirk. The teacher was at a loss, anger simmering beneath the surface. She knew that laying a hand on Samson could cost her job, especially given his mother's influence. Suppressing her frustration, she resumed her lesson, then left the classroom as soon as the bell rang. Later that day, Bright sat under a mango tree trying to find some peace. But as he glanced around, he noticed Samson bullying another student nearby. Samson had cornered the boy, taunting and intimidating him until he looked on the verge of tears. Bright's heart pounded with anger, and his fists clenched. For a moment, he felt the urge to step in and stop Samson, but his father's warning echoed in his mind. After a long pause, Bright took a deep breath, forcing himself to turn away and walk in the opposite direction, conflicted yet determined to heed his father's advice. That evening, Bright came home with a somber expression, his mind heavy with frustration. His mother, Mrs. Solomon, immediately noticed his mood and approached him. "Bright, is everything all right?" she asked gently. Bright sighed, glancing at her with a mixture of anger and exhaustion. "Mom, why can't I just go to a school without bullies? It's getting worse every day. It's like the teachers and even the principal are powerless against Samson and his friends. I can't keep pretending like nothing is happening." Mrs. Solomon placed a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Bright, I understand, but you really need to listen to your father. He only wants you to stay out of trouble and focus on your studies." "Mom," Bright interrupted, his frustration boiling over. "Are you even listening to me? Samson and his gang make school a living hell for everyone. It's not fair." Mrs. Solomon tried to reassure him, but Bright, already upset, simply shook his head and went upstairs, closing the door to his room as the weight of his thoughts sank in even more. The next day at school, Bright sat quietly outside his classroom, lost in thought. He barely noticed when Jenny approached him, sensing his distant mood. "Bright, can I talk to you?" she asked, her voice hesitant. Bright stood up, as if to leave, but Jenny gently stopped him. "Please," she said, "I'm sorry I didn't explain things sooner." She took a deep breath and continued, "Samson and his friends, they've been tormenting everyone. He even threatened me not to talk to any other guys. That's why I was so scared before." Bright looked at her, surprised and saddened by what she was going through. "Jenny," he said, determination sparking in his eyes, "the only way to defeat Samson and his gang is for everyone to unite and stand up to him. We need to work together. This isn't just about you or me. This is about every student he's bullied." As they talked, Samson passed by, glaring at them, but he said nothing. His silence was tense, and his gaze was sharp as he watched Bright and Jenny, jealousy and rage simmering in his eyes. Later that day, as the school bell rang and students began heading home, Samson and his friends blocked Bright's path. Bright stood his ground, calm and unshaken. Samson smirked, stepping closer to him. "You better stay away from Jenny, or you won't like what happens next," he warned, his voice dripping with menace. Bright didn't flinch. Instead, he simply smiled, shook his head, and then walked away without saying a word. Enraged, Samson shouted after him, "Who does he think he is, ignoring me like that?" His friends tried to calm him, but Samson's anger was palpable, and his pride was wounded. The following morning, Bright gathered all the students who had been bullied by Samson and his friends. They met at the back of the school, many of them surprised to see others who had suffered similarly. Murmurs of curiosity filled the air as they waited to hear what Bright had to say. Bright stepped forward, his voice steady but passionate. "I know all of you are tired of being bullied by Samson and his gang. They think they can control us, but that stops today. To stand up to him, we need to be united and courageous. A bully to one is a bully to all. If we work together and support each other, we can show him that we're not afraid." The students nodded, their spirits lifting as they began to feel a sense of empowerment. Bright continued, "The teachers and the principal can't help us because of Samson's mother's influence. But we can help each other. If we fight back together, we have a chance to make the school safe for everyone." With a newfound sense of courage, the students began chanting, "A bully to one is a bully to all." Their voices grew louder, and for the first time they felt hopeful, ready to reclaim their school. 2 weeks later, in a classroom, a student named Samuel was sitting alone, enjoying his lunch when Samson and his friends approached him, their usual smug expressions on their faces. "Hand over your lunch," Samson demanded, smirking. But Samuel, remembering Bright's words about standing his ground, looked Samson in the eye and replied firmly, "No." Samson's face twisted in anger. "What did you just say?" Samuel stood up, his voice unwavering. "I said no. I'm tired of being pushed around." Caught off guard by Samuel's newfound confidence, Samson lunged at him. But Samuel had prepared himself, and in a moment of courage he swung, landing a punch on Samson's face. Samson staggered back, shocked as he fell to the floor. The other students who had been watching in silence burst into laughter, their voices echoing through the hall. Samson's face turned red with embarrassment as he scrambled to his feet, glaring at everyone before storming out with his friends. That day marked a turning point for the students of Wisdom King International High School. Samson and his gang realized that their reign of fear was over, and the students, led by Bright's courage and determination, finally felt a sense of peace and unity. The words, "A bully to one is a bully to all," became their rallying cry, a reminder that they were stronger together. Later that afternoon, as the final bell rang and students began leaving, Samson and his gang decided to stay behind, hiding by the school gates to wait for Samuel. Samuel, on the other hand, felt an uneasy chill run down his spine as he realized Samson was planning something. Bright noticed Samuel's worried expression as he hesitated near the classroom. "Hey Samuel, is everything all right?" Bright asked, sensing something was wrong. Samuel hesitated, then explained, "I think Samson and his friends are waiting for me. I stood up to them today, and now they want to get even." Bright immediately called the other students together. "Listen, we can't let anyone face Samson alone. From now on, we all go home together. Remember, a bully to one is a bully to all." Encouraged by Bright's words, the students nodded, standing together as a unified front. They left the school in a large group, marching toward the gates. As expected, Samson and his gang were there, waiting. Samson's face twisted with anger as he saw the group approaching, refusing to be intimidated. As the two groups faced off, Samson's friends cheered him on, boosting his confidence. Bright, calm but firm, suggested, "Let's allow Samuel and Samson to settle this on their own." For a moment, Samson hesitated, surprised by the show of unity. But under the encouragement of his friends, he tried to hold his ground. Samuel, feeling the support of his peers, found courage within himself. With renewed strength, he fought back, managing to throw Samson to the ground. Stunned, Samson struggled, his confidence crumbling as Samuel defended himself and landed a few solid blows. One of Samson's friends, seeing that Samson was in trouble, ran to the principal, who was on his way out. But the principal, tired of Samson's bullying and manipulation, pretended not to notice, quietly relieved to see someone finally standing up to him. After the fight, Samson limped home, bruised and shaken. His mother, Mrs. Badmus, was horrified to see him battered and hurt. "What happened to you, Samson?" she demanded, her voice laced with anger. "Mom, I was beaten up by my classmates," Samson said, barely able to look her in the eye. Mrs. Badmus's face contorted with rage, and she instantly decided to take matters into her own hands. The next day, Mrs. Badmus stormed into the school, her voice echoing through the hallways as she demanded to see the principal. Students and teachers peeked out of classrooms, knowing a confrontation was about to unfold. The principal, along with several teachers, came to the front office, concerned but not entirely surprised. "Who hurt my son?" Mrs. Badmus shouted. "I want answers." The students looked at each other nervously, but then one by one, Bright, Samuel, and others stepped forward. Samuel raised his hand first. "I was the one who stood up to him," he said. Mrs. Badmus's face turned red with fury, but before she could speak, another student raised their hand, and then another. Soon almost the entire group had raised their hands, each one silently declaring their stance against Samson's bullying. "What is going on here?" Mrs. Badmus demanded, now visibly flustered. "You all are saying you did this to my son?" "Yes, ma'am," Bright replied, stepping forward. "We're all tired of being bullied by Samson. You can't just punish one of us. We're all standing together." Mrs. Badmus clenched her fists, her anger building. "I demand you expel these students," she yelled at the principal, but the principal stood his ground. "Mrs. Badmus, I can't expel an entire class. Your son's behaviour has been a problem for too long. The students are simply standing up for themselves. This situation has gone on far enough." Mrs. Badmus, seething, threatened, "I'll shut this school down. My influence will make sure no one here has a job by the end of the week." Bright stepped forward, his voice steady and respectful. "Ma'am, you've only cared about protecting Samson, no matter the cost to everyone else, but your son has made life unbearable for the rest of us. If you really want to know the truth, ask anyone here about him. No one will have anything good to say." Mrs. Badmus fell silent, the weight of Bright's words hitting her hard. For the first time, she realized the extent of Samson's behavior and the effect it had on others. She looked around and saw the students nodding, confirming Bright's statement. "Go on," Bright continued, his voice unwavering. "Ask them. Samson's actions have made this school a living nightmare. If you want to protect him, you have to acknowledge the pain he's caused." Defeated and speechless, Mrs. Badmus turned, taking Samson by the arm and leading him out of the school without saying another word. As they left, the students erupted in cheers, a sense of relief and triumph filling the air. The principal approached Bright, gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you, Bright. You showed real courage today." From that day on, the school became a place where students felt safe and empowered. Samson's reign of fear had ended, and the phrase, "a bully to one is a bully to all," became a symbol of unity and resilience among the students. They had taken back their school, and Bright's bravery had inspired them to believe in their own strength. That same evening, at the Badmus household, Mrs. Badmus sat alone, lost in thought. Bright's words echoed in her mind, each one hitting harder than the last. She had always thought she was doing right by Samson, giving him whatever he wanted, protecting him from consequences. But now she was beginning to see that she had, in many ways, failed to truly guide him. "I need to act fast," she murmured to herself. Without hesitating, Mrs. Badmus raised her voice, more serious than ever before. "I said, give me your phone. From this moment on, you won't have access to it or to any of the privileges you've taken for granted, not until you change." Stunned, Samson tried to argue. "But Mom, why are you doing this? What did I do?" Mrs. Badmus crossed her arms, her face filled with disappointment. "What kind of son have I raised? I've given you everything, every comfort, every advantage, and you've done nothing but use it to bring others down. Your classmates don't like you, Samson. They fear you because of how you treat them, and that is my fault as much as yours. From now on, things will be different. You will go back to that school and apologize to every single person you've wronged." "But Mom," Samson began, his voice softening. "No, Samson," she interrupted, her tone final. "There are no more excuses, no more privileges. It's time to take responsibility for your actions." With that, she turned and went back upstairs, leaving Samson stunned and grappling with the realization that his life was about to change drastically. 2 weeks later, Mrs. Badmus and Samson arrived at the school early during the morning assembly. As they stepped into the courtyard, murmurs spread quickly through the crowd of students. Many were surprised and wary to see Samson back, wondering what he was up to. But this time something was different. Samson didn't walk with the arrogance he once had. Instead, he looked uncomfortable, even humbled. The principal stepped forward, nodding toward Mrs. Badmus. She spoke up, her voice calm but resolute. "Good morning, everyone. Today, Samson has something he would like to say." With that, she gently nudged Samson toward the podium. He swallowed hard, visibly uncomfortable in front of his classmates and teachers, all of whom were waiting in tense silence. Taking a deep breath, Samson began. I know that I've hurt a lot of you. I know I've made school a hard place to be for many of you. I bullied, I intimidated, and I never thought about how it was affecting everyone else. He glanced over at his mother, who gave him an encouraging nod. He continued, I was wrong, and I'm sorry. I want to change, and I know that it won't be easy for any of you to trust me again, but I'm asking for a chance to make things right. I want to be better, and I want to be part of a school where no one has to feel scared. The students exchanged surprised glances, and some of the teachers looked pleased to see this unexpected humility from Samson. To everyone's surprise, Bright stepped forward, extending his hand toward Samson. Apology accepted, Samson. And if you're serious, you're welcome to join us in making this a place where no one has to face bullying alone. A bully to one is a bully to all. Samson nodded, shaking Bright's hand, visibly moved by the unexpected forgiveness. The assembly watched in stunned silence as Bright and Samson stood side by side. From that day forward, the two became friends and allies, working together to keep the school safe from bullies. Samson was no longer feared, but respected as he joined in supporting those he once mistreated. And the phrase, a bully to one is a bully to all, became a reminder to the entire school that unity was their strength, ensuring a better future for everyone. Thanks for watching, guys. I believe you enjoyed this amazing Nollywood story. Kindly subscribe to this channel to get more of our latest Nollywood movie stories.